Hey there, welcome to the Thriving in Wellness podcast with Haley and Caitlin. This podcast is for women who are tired of just surviving and ready to truly thrive. It's time to reclaim your health and build trust in your body.
Join us as we myth-bust nutrition topics, tackle your mindset, and dive into the nerdy side of women's health. Just a reminder that this is meant for educational purposes only and is not meant to be used for medical diagnosis or treatment. Now let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Thriving in Wellness podcast, and happy Thursday. Today we are talking about relationship with food, and it can be a complex topic. It's funny because I think some people I work with, especially more so the women, they kind of understand this concept of what's your relationship with food? Because that's a question I have on like my intake form, and we'll talk to people about a little bit more on our initial call. But for the few guys that I work with, sometimes they're like, I don't know what you mean by this. It's really interesting to see the difference there. But anyways, we want to talk about what does this even mean to have a healthy relationship with food? What does this look like, and how can you start to work towards a healthier relationship with food if this is something you desire? So we're going to break this down, but I think first and foremost, we want to establish that relationship with food might look different for everyone, but ultimately we don't want you to be fearful of food, so afraid to eat certain things. And this can come about in many different ways.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they have their certain foods that are kind of in that
Off limits.
yes.
Yeah.
That they're just like not supposed to eat those things. And so while women, yes, tend to be a little bit more familiar with like relationship with food concept, I think people are often surprised that when they're working with us, we're not like encouraging their like off limit foods and like these
Yeah. We're not supplying them with a yes or no food list.
no. And then oftentimes people are like, "Ooh, you're like a food therapist."
Yes.
And it
That's
is,
one of my favorite. Yeah.
yep, it is like that a little bit. But yeah, of course, we don't want people to be afraid of eating foods. It can definitely hold you back from making the progress that you want to make. And I think one example of that is um sometimes like it can be hard to get the protein intake that we need. And I know it's one thing that a lot of my patients struggle with when they realize how much protein they really need to have. And we're usually working with very busy women, either, moms or people who are working or working moms. So having some quick, easy proteins on hand can be really helpful. But so often, I know for both of us, these women will come back and say, well, that's processed. I don't want to eat that. That's one of their off-limit foods. But it's preventing them from being able to get the protein intake that they need, because they don't have anything, quick and easily accessible. So then they're either foregoing the protein altogether or going out and eating much more processed foods like fast food.
And then getting frustrated with themselves that they did that.
Yes. Yeah, and feeling guilty that they made that choice. And so I think a big piece with having a healthy relationship with food is being flexible and kind of understanding where are you at, in the point of your life. And are there things in like your off limit list that you can actually find decent options of that are maybe slightly processed, but maybe aren't as bad as some other options out there.
Yeah, and I think another thing that came to mind when you were talking through that is a way this holds people back, maybe not even just with hitting like their protein goals and things like that, but also in regards to following through with things or staying consistent, because I've seen time and time again, if women have this list of off-limit foods or things that they feel guilty about eating, if they have a meal or a weekend or whatever that maybe includes more of those foods, that guilt and shame really weighs them down and also leads them to often kind of just throw everything out the window. Like, well, I ate that, so why am I even trying? And then it starts this vicious cycle of like, okay, I'll start over again on Monday. And then, whereas if you have more of that flexibility and recognize that eating, even if it is like something that isn't super healthy for you, which we'll talk about, that doesn't mean you need to throw everything out the window.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too off track with this, but a great example I heard, I think another dietitian might have posted this online a while ago, but it stuck with me. It's like if you were late to work and you were driving along the highway and got a flat tire, would you pull over and slash the other three, or would you fix the one, right? You're going to fix that one tire.
Yeah.
So thinking about that in regards to your meals, if you have one meal throughout the day or even the week that is less healthy or more indulgent, whatever, however you want to think about it, why are you then going to say, well, forget it, I'm just going to eat like crap the rest of the day, for
Yep.
say, okay, that happened. That was great. I'm going to
Yep.
move on and choose something healthier at the next meal. Right.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where I tell patients, because often they're coming to us saying like, "Oh, I was so bad this weekend."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you do go and have something a little bit more indulgent, that's when I say those foods make us happy. They are good for us in a completely different sense. They may not be the most nutritious thing for our body,
Mm-hmm.
but they're making us happy. And it's okay to enjoy foods that aren't super nutritious, but that, make your brain or your soul happy. Um, and and feeling guilty about that is just kind of defeating the purpose. And so recognizing like there's two different types of foods,
Mm-hmm.
our happy foods, and then foods that are like good and nutritious for our body. And sometimes there's overlap, but sometimes there's not.
Yeah, exactly. And you and I talk about this a fair amount too with our clients, is like when you're stressing about eating these foods, like I think there's some good research on this too. Like if you're eating a food that you feel guilty about, or you're like that you have that thought process as you're eating, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm eating this. You have this guilt, all these negative things running through your brain as you're eating it. Your body's actually going to digest that differently
Mhm.
than if you just enjoy the freaking cookie and you feel fine about it, right? So, like, stressing about the food is in some cases worse than whatever is happening in your body with your blood sugar, whatever, from eating that less healthy food.
Yep, absolutely. To completely switch gears, because yes, of course, we do not want you to be afraid of foods. But on the flip side, we're not like, we're not always the like everything in moderation
Like,
kind
there's
of
no foods
diet.
that aren't healthy.
Right. Like it's okay to have structure with what you're eating and to want to eat and primarily eat like really good nutritious foods, things that are not highly processed. It's also okay to do that. And that doesn't mean that you then just have this like super unhealthy relationship with food.
Exactly. We don't live in La La Land where we think that like eating Cheetos and chips and everything is going to be totally fine for you. And we also recognize that we live in a world that has a lot of hyper palatable, highly processed foods that makes those really tempting and easy to just eat a lot of. And we recognize that that is impacting the health of the US, right? And so we're not going to deny that. So I think when we're talking about this relationship with food, because a majority of the place that majority of our clients are in is that they come to us with this history of diet, with trying to figure things out. I think a majority of the people already have somewhat of a nutrition foundation where they recognize there's foods that are going to be healthier than others, right? We just sometimes have to work to challenge those beliefs that aren't serving them. And so that's where it's okay and give yourself permission to have that flexibility. So if you have that strong foundation of like, yeah, you're getting those veggies in and everything, then there's no reason to feel guilty about having the treat every once in a while and things. It's all about figuring out what's going to work for you. And I think that leads into our other point too of just because, like, for example, if you want to eat something, like, hey, maybe you have a craving for some ice cream, but you still choose to forego it in that moment because you maybe know that you won't feel super great afterwards, or it's not supportive of your goals at this time. It's okay to give yourself permission to skip it. And that also doesn't mean you have an unhealthy relationship with food. That doesn't mean it's disordered if you say like, hey, I want to skip this right now. Even if you have a desire to eat it. There's times when I have desires to eat a bunch of chips, but I know like my body needs some protein right now, so I need to balance it out with something else.
Yeah, and you know that if you have chips every single day, you're just probably not gonna feel very good.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's okay. And it's such a gray area.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this, dove into this part of it a lot more on our episode. I don't even know what season it was. Now I'll have to look it up, but episode about intuitive eating and our thoughts on that, because we practice in a way that we recognize, or we strongly feel that becoming a true intuitive eater, or instinctual eater was another way to put it, is we need to lean more on these nutritious foods to allow our body to have those hormonal signals and everything that are supposed to be happening going on, to allow us to eat in a way that we can be intuitive, listen to those hunger and fullness signals, right? We can't just jump to like, yeah, eat whatever you want, eat intuitively. Like there's a big gap between where a lot of people are coming to us and being a true intuitive eater. That takes a
Right.
lot of work for most people.
Yeah, for sure. I think about this a lot with um, my toddler because she's 3.5.
Mhm.
And I obviously want to support her in having a healthy relationship with food, but I also want to provide her nutritious foods.
Mhm.
And of course she loves the popsicles and the candy and like
We're wired to.
right. So
Yeah.
it's like, well, of course you're gonna want those things, but I have to set limitations on when she can have them and how much she can have of those things. And talk about food in a way that she's not feeling bad about herself in any sense when she is eating those foods, but knowing that um you know the eggs and the fruit and the chicken and the vegetables that we're having for dinner, like those are nutritious foods that are going to give her energy and make her feel good and um you know help her grow big and strong, and that the other treats are fun foods and not things that we're going to have all the time or every day, except we do use them to support going to the bathroom because it works very well.
There's a time and a place.
Yeah, potty training is hard.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I was thinking about as you were talking through that too is I don't really know where this came from. Maybe it's just this years and years that we've been through this toxic diet culture and everything, but like it's okay to have discipline when it comes to your diet. I think it's what it frankly comes down to. Like a healthy relationship, at least in my mind, and to me, what it looks like for me in my life is to have structure and discipline around food choices,
Mhm.
but not feel guilty if I'm not able to eat in a really healthy way for whatever reason every once in a while, or if I really want to enjoy a treat and be okay with that.
Mhm.
And it's taken me years to get to this point. But it's interesting to me that we don't I mean, maybe we do, but in most scenarios, like we don't negatively look at discipline. Like we don't look at discipline as a bad thing in so many other areas of life. Like we expect people to show up to work, be on time, do all these other things, like be responsible adults.
Yeah,
But when it comes to having discipline around food, that automatically means disordered relationship with food. Like
right. Yeah,
what?
and I guess for me, I don't even think about my like structure around
Uh-huh.
food as part of my relationship with food. Those are the things that help me feel my best.
Yeah.
Like the last couple of weeks, I've not been doing the things that I know I need to be doing to make me feel good, and I haven't felt good. And I had a little wake up call with myself a few days ago. I have got to get myself together so that I can feel better. And it's all about how I like physically feel in my body and the energy that I have. My relationship with my food is completely related to, am I feeling guilty, or like at this point in my life now, having a healthy relationship with food, the lack of feeling guilty
Mhm.
around my food choices. Like that's just like guilt or shame is not a piece of my food choices anymore.
Exactly. But it's taken us a while to get here, right?
Oh,
And we talk about it with so many people now that it's like always in the forefront of our mind. Whereas I think a lot of people, those are wrapped up. Like they feel like they have to, the reason they do feel guilty is because they know it's not helping their goals or for, whatever reason. So that is all wrapped up. And so that is ultimately where we want people to be, is kind of where we're at, honestly, is in
yeah.
a, we have not always been here. I want to make that clear. I had definitely have not always been here. There is so many diets that I've been on, so much guilt and shame that was wrapped up in like at one point just anything like related to carbs, right? And so I've been through the gamut with relationship with food. So hopefully this gives you some hope too, that it is possible to heal and shift that and get to a place where you're not feeling this constant burden or fear around food and overwhelm. Because I think that's another thing I hear from people too, is like it's so draining when you have this negative relationship with food, and especially with women, if you are a mom, like that can impact your kids as well.
Yep.
Not to throw my mom under the bus, but I feel like a lot of mine came from observing my mom and her relationship with her body and food, right? So you can change this generationally too. So I think this is a good point to kind of talk about the exercise that we want to leave you with. So what is a way, or what is something that we can have people kind of walk through to help them evaluate their relationship with food and start to improve it if that's something they're wanting to work on?
Yeah. So first, before we get too much into that, I have one more thing to
Okay,
say.
go for it.
um, because just recently we talked about health being a journey. I would say one thing with our relationship with food is that while I really feel like I'm at a great spot with it, it is something that I check in with every once in a
True,
while.
very true.
And I notice, I just pay attention to things and see if there is any of that guilt coming in, and I just try to look at it with like an objective lens.
Hmm.
Um, but it is something, especially because we both do have a history of having such an unhealthy relationship with food, that I am always mindful of. Um, so I think we can definitely all achieve a healthy relationship with food, but
Not a destination.
it is not a destination.
I
So,
100% agree, 100%. And I want to also just tag onto that, that there are days where I do feel like some of those negative thoughts and things creep back in.
mhm,
But the difference is I don't let that take over or completely control my food choices, or yeah, I guess like totally impact my life. Whereas before it's like it was all consuming.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Where were we at before that?
leave leave everyone, our listeners, with something to work on when it comes to the relationship with food.
Awesome. So, I want you to think about, and honestly, this might be a good time to like really journal about this a little bit, because relationship with food can be very complex,
Mhm.
and it can be hard when just like all of your thoughts are in your brain. So jotting some things down might help you really recognize how you're feeling about your relationship with food. So, what does that look like to you? Do you believe it's possible for you to achieve a healthy relationship with food? And then what would be kind of the next step? Because I would say most people have not a great relationship with food. There's
Yeah.
something going on. Um, so what is that next step for you so that you can really start to heal your relationship with food? And I would also think about like, what is your motivation for that? It is it yourself? Um, there's nothing wrong with that. But is it also your kids? Are you wanting to break um that like generational piece so
Mhm.
that you can raise them to have a healthier relationship with food as well.
Yeah. And I know for a lot of moms that I've worked with, that they might initially want to do it for themselves, but they recognize those benefits once they start to make those changes. And that really helps to keep them going. So, whatever that might look like for you, just get curious about it. And whether that next step is like speaking to a loved one about it or reaching out and getting support. For some people, it's more information to better understand how they can support their health.
Mhm.
Whatever it needs to do, whatever you need to do, we encourage you to do that, and we're always here to support you. So feel free to reach out on Instagram if you have more questions on this, want to chat more about this topic, dietitian Caitlin or dietitian Haley, and we will see you next week.